Did you guys see that before this football weekend started? I don't know. If you haven't heard what this is about, you will find it both amusing and not surprising that Bill Belichick, in one of these press conferences where he never says anything, never wants to talk, is usually famously curt and is almost always dry. There's not a lot of laughter in these things.
No.
He was asked a question, and he gave an answer that was about 1,500 words long and was about 9 minutes long. And he said 3 or 4 times, "This is a really great question."
And it's an interesting conversation. I mean, it's a great question. It's a good question. It's really interesting.
Thank you, Bill. That was as thorough and in-depth as I had hoped it would be, so thank you.
No, you're welcome, Ben. Thanks for the question.
Do you want to guess what he was asked that made him go on like just an emotional ramble that doesn't have a lot of precedent in the history of dry Belichick press conference?
Was he asked about his long snapper?
He was.
Wow.
Oh, that's the wheelhouse.
Is long snapping that difficult that you need to use a roster on one player who does only that? Can't you just cross-train a few guys to do long snapping and then have more flexibility with that roster spot?
He was asked about long snapping, and he talked.
Waiting for that question forever. He came
like,
home
finally.
whistling. Great day.
He called the Maras on the way home. He's like, "You're not going to
Whistling.
believe what they finally asked me. They finally asked me about the long snapper." How is that possible? That the only way to engage him? Do you think that? I don't think he's remarried. I think this is his girlfriend. Do you think that that's what she asked them on their first date? Like,
That's how she got him.
it's the way to his soul. The long snapper is the way to Belichick's soul. He said 3 or 4 times. Not only did he walk home whistling, the reporter walks home whistling because he's like, "I cracked open Belichick with my question."
He wrote 1,500 words off the long snapper because, hey, I got Belichick on something.
Imagine that beat writer walks into the catering room and the seas part. And it's just like, there he is.
Triumphant music is blaring over speakers.
He's entered a new territory, this guy.
Did you guys see that ESPN, and these things die hard, but everyone on ESPN picked FSU to beat Wake Forest, and it's not based on what you've seen this season. It's based only on, well, FSU can't lose to Wake Forest, right? Like
It's based on reputation, of course.
That's one program that does a lot of winning, and that's Wake Forest.
Surely they will have enough pride in their program to dust themselves off after losing to the second most famous Gamecocks and second most famous Jacksonville.
What are they going to do? They paid Taggart how much money to go away, and Taggart was better than Norvell. Like, what are they going to do?
It was like $20 million, and I believe they had to pay Oregon also to take Taggart from Oregon. So they ended up paying him a lot of money.
And we said last week, now it's even worse. I think he's got to go 7-3 to match what made them buy out Taggart.
And remember why they found themselves in that position to begin with, Dan. It's because Jimbo Fisher left an FSU program in which, this is really hard to do, which he won a title for. He won a national championship at FSU. They had a down year, obviously, the year that he decided to leave, but that tells you what you need to know about this program. If a head coach who's built up a legacy at this program, who's just very fresh off a national title win, will just opt to leave for Texas A&M to get more support.
But he left for the SEC, did he not?
He left for the SEC. He left for that money. He left for those boosters. He left for the resources that program would commit to them, because Taggart comes in, everyone knows we have to do something about these facilities. So they stretch themselves beyond their financial means, collect all the donations they can for their boosters to go get this coach and pump out this facility that this coach tells them that they've been hearing for years that they need. Coach is a dud. Instead of waiting on it for just a little bit longer to see if they can save some money or know if they made the right choice or not, they fire him. He wasn't very good. What was his record over at FSU?
It was like 9-12.
Yeah, it wasn't good. They were on a downward trajectory. So what happens next? You have to absolutely nail your next hire. Otherwise, your program is done. When you're behind the 8 ball financially, you're spread that thin, you have to nail it. They go to Memphis, and they get Mike Norvell. And now everybody wants him out. He has a worse record than Taggart had before him. I don't know if they can afford to buy out Mike Norvell right now. And whatever coach that they hire has got to be on the cheap. I don't know how they have the money for it.
And you look at their financial picture of paying out Willie Taggart, his buyout to fire him was $18 million. His buyout to hire him from Oregon was $3 million.
Man.
They also had to pay $1.3 million that Oregon still owed to USF. So they paid 3 buyouts that cost over $22 million.
But don't you guys think that job still has enough cachet right now? It might not in 2 years, but right now it still does, where a good coach might be willing to do it on the cheap? Perhaps?
I don't know, because there were reports that came out around the time Jimbo Fisher left that were basic. I think ESPN did a long story on this. Basically, like, the entire athletic department, it was in disarray. And Jimbo left because he kind of just stopped recruiting. He stopped really caring too much. He was kind of looking to the next thing after winning the national championship. And so it sounds like there's just multiple parties in charge who are completely on separate pages about who to hire, about where to put funds and that sort of thing. So if you're a head coach, that doesn't sound very appealing.
That one needs to marinate with the audience, though. The idea that before now they couldn't figure out how to pay players, and you've got a guy like Taggart out in 2 years after getting 3 different buyouts worth $22 million.
With the world getting smaller and recruiting advantages not really mattering in terms of your region anymore, you'll be watching St. Thomas at ESPN, and you'll be confused why a coach that has a noon kickoff the very next day is on the sidelines. You don't understand how. Private jets, boosters paying for those private jets. Travel is to be able to go on a recruiting trip to the West Coast midweek. You couldn't do that before. Now you can. It's a totally different game. And where the state of Florida and their programs really rose in the 80s and 90s because of travel logistics, because you had this great fertile recruiting base down here. Now, Nick Saban can fly down here and make a half-day trip out of it, see you at your high school practice and fly back, and then FaceTime with some recruit out in Pullman, Washington. It's just different now. And the Florida schools outside of the University of Florida that has a huge alumni base and huge boosters have a real problem because those advantages are dissipating. The other schools are only getting more powerful. Something needs to happen there. It's going to cost money, and I don't think FSU and Miami in particular have that money.